It's disgusting. It's despicable. You know, at the time, many people couldn't see their loved ones who were dying. The British public were told to do the right thing, to keep people safe, to look after their relatives. And we find out that an email to over 100 people was sent out from Downing Street saying, come along to our party, bring your own booze, the weather's nice. I mean, it can only be described as something that will make everyone angry. You know, the Prime Minister should know better. You know, we're in a time of crisis and we needed good leadership, and what we got is somebody who was good at telling lies and fibs and has actually smirked about some of these issues when doing interviews. And I think the British public now have just about had enough.
Now, we've got a name on the email, of course, the sender, Martin Reynolds, the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, and government sources suggesting today that he should have been more careful. He was meant to be protecting Downing Street staff, yet he sent this out. Do you think he's been lined up as the fall guy?
Well, he can't be the fall guy because we know that, you know, there's multiple allegations now around parties and the culture that was happening around Downing Street at the time, and that comes back to the Prime Minister. And I think it's disgraceful. You can't get out of this one. This is very clear that you shouldn't have been doing it. People were in devastating situations. I lost relatives during the COVID pandemic, as many did, and many people now who are still grieving the loss of their loved ones will be feeling heartbroken that not only did the Prime Minister think it was OK to throw parties at number 10, but he was also trying to deceive the public by saying he had nothing to do with it. That's despicable, it's disgraceful, and he should be absolutely ashamed of himself.
Well, he was asked about it today, and he didn't confirm or deny whether he was at it or not. If he were at that party, what would your reaction be?
He should go. I mean, if he was at that party, I mean, he shouldn't have been allowing parties to happen in number 10. I find it shocking, some of his responses that he's had to, I didn't know about it, you know, it wasn't on my watch. Well, it clearly was. There was more than one party happening in the heart of government, and I find it absolutely astonishing that the Prime Minister thinks that he had nothing to do with it, didn't know anything about it. I think, you know, he needs to reflect on his behaviours and reflect on what he's done to the British public, you know.
But let's be explicit here. You say he needs to reflect on his behaviour, but in your view, he'd have to reflect out of office. If he was at that party, Labour is calling for the Prime Minister to resign.
I mean, it'd be no shock to anyone listening to this programme that I don't think the Prime Minister's fit to govern. But I think the most important thing now is the British public have lost confidence in the Prime Minister. And if the Prime Minister was at this party, then I think it's the British public that will be demanding. And the fact that his MPs are allowing him to carry on as the Prime Minister just shows the contempt that the Conservatives have for the British public, who were doing the right thing at the time and were keeping their loved ones safe. And many of them didn't even get to say goodbye. And I think that's something that the Prime Minister should think on, not just about his career, but about as a human being and about what you say to people in their hour of need, when they need that support, when they're looking for that level of leadership. You let them down so badly. That's what you should be reflecting on.
Just let me ask you about the process. I know you have confidence in the investigation that's been carried out by Sue Gray, who's looking into not just these allegations, but other ones as well. But just be very clear that if Sue Gray's recommendation is that Martin Reynolds should resign after this, you would say that's not enough. It must be the Prime Minister as well.
I think if the Prime Minister knew about this party, attended this party, and all the other evidence and the parties that have been alleged has happened, all of that evidence, if the law has been broken, should be handed over to the police, and nobody is above the law in this country, and they should be dealt with appropriately. But this isn't a one-off now. This is endemic. People are saying, you know, there's memes about how many parties number 10 have had, because people are so, like, you know, they're so upset by what the government have done. It's astonishing that at a time of crisis that this government thinks it's OK to laugh at the British people and think there's one rule for them and one rule for everybody else. Well, that's not how we stand up in this country. That's not what we stand for. And the Prime Minister needs to reflect upon that. Are
you saying to the Metropolitan Police, you touched on it there, I mean, this was the law at the time, and if the law has been broken, you would want the Metropolitan Police to launch a criminal investigation?
Absolutely, and nobody is above the law in this country. If the law has been broken, the Metropolitan Police should be dealing with that, yes, and I think that Sue Gray should give that information over to the police. If there's evidence, the police should look at that and that they should deal with it as they would do any other member of the public during that period. And let's not forget, many members of the public did get dealt with criminally as part of what happened in COVID, so therefore I don't think Boris Johnson should be dealt with any differently.
I mean, you mentioned there just how angry some people are. Sky News has been talking to a woman who was actually in the back garden of Downing Street invited there to talk about how she lost one of her relatives.
Yeah, it's devastating. I mean, people going back to May, and around that time in May, it was the Eid celebrations, of course, and many people had to sacrifice those celebrations that are very important to them. So a lot of people made huge sacrifices, not seeing their loved ones when they were dying, and it will anger people because the Prime Minister has a responsibility. If he's telling people to follow the rules, then surely the very least he could do was follow those rules himself and create a culture around government that says these rules are serious, we're asking people to make big sacrifices, we should be doing the same.
I've got to put it in there, though, but of course, you know, they were working terribly hard in Downing Street, of course they were. And the fact that there were a lot of people there, of course, we were being told to work from home if we could at the time, but they had to be there.
But let me say...
Not whole parties, I get that.
Absolutely, but many of our members of the NHS... were sacrificing not seeing their loved ones. Some people, our care workers, were intense and not seeing their families so that they could look after elderly people. Many people made huge sacrifices who were working incredibly hard at the time, keeping our country going. They didn't throw parties. They were seeing the effects of COVID, seeing people dying and choking in hospitals. So for the Prime Minister and people around him to be throwing parties at the time the death rates were as high as they were and people were told that they couldn't see their loved ones when they were dying, I think that is the worst thing you could possibly expect the Prime Minister to have been doing at that time.
We can only speculate about this, but if remembering at the time, there seemed to be an awful lot of people in and around Downing Street, including obviously the Prime Minister, Dominic Cummings, and others who caught COVID at the time. Does this perhaps provide part of the explanation?
Well, I don't know why people were catching COVID at the time around Downing Street. People should have been in work if they needed to be in work as essential workers. As you say, many of our key workers did. I pay tribute to them and the work that they continue to do. This flies in the face of that when they find out that they were working really hard, 12-hour shifts, looking after people who were dying. The Prime Minister and people around him was throwing a party in Number 10. That's not OK.